This is Aliens and Artists Part 2 of our conversation with Jim Semivan. I'm Stuart Davis. Jim worked in the CIA's Directorate of Operations for 25 years, both overseas and domestically. He was a member of Senior Intelligence Service. He is also an experiencer of contact with non-human entities and has stated flatly, these things are otherworldly and everyone in the government knows it. In this Plus episode, we cover high strangeness, spiritual practice, and protections, the impact that contact and trauma have on human development. But first, we begin by talking about spirit guides and how they factor as resources for an experiencer like Jim. Let's start with the $64,000 question. When we consider the available responses to this utterly bewildering enigma, when we try to identify actionable improvements to these difficult conditions, we find ourselves contending with high strangeness here. What I've personally found can make a difference is calling upon metaphysical resources that are part of the old presences on Earth, our old human spiritual lineages. So this big question, can we alter the dynamic between human and non-human intelligences? If so, what are the mechanisms with the most potency? And how can we scale that in populations? I know you're a spiritually vitalized person with a practice, and I'm curious about what your spiritual response has been to this conflagration of puzzles.
Wow. Okay. It's funny. I'm so glad you brought that up because it just dawned on me. And I guess when I spoke earlier of how my experience changed me, I just thought of this. It wasn't until years later, probably maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that I started to develop a relationship with spirit guides, my own spirit guides. And I know I have 2 of them. And I had an older brother who recently passed away, who was a huge influence on my life, extremely bright guy, and he was into this very much. He was a devoted Catholic, but he was more of a Christ consciousness type of Catholic. And he became one of my spirit guides, and I do converse with him. You know what I mean? I ask them things, and I always say with deep love and gratitude, if you could help me understand this, or maybe you can help me with a small problem. And they always seem to answer me, you know what I mean? And they don't talk to me, but they always seem to answer me in one way or another. Something resolves within a day or two. So I find that to be quite encouraging, and that I never would have done that, before, after that experience. So maybe, that is something. I've just learned something about myself. You know what I mean? That was a change. But and I didn't mean to sound so pessimistic either earlier on when I was talking about where do you go? We're all doomed. We're not all doomed. As a matter of fact, I think what's happening is, we're on this planet in this universe, and maybe it looks to me like it is a learning experience. It looks to me like it's a place where you go through these trials and tribulations, of the biblical type, not necessarily the biblical type, constantly. And you're constantly being asked, at least your consciousness should be talking to you and saying, how do you react to these on a daily basis in a good, moral, kind, compassionate way? Because that's really what it's all about, isn't it? In the end, it isn't about knowledge or the acquisition of knowledge. It's really all comes down to love and kindness and compassion. And I think if we see that and we're able to develop that, then it doesn't matter what this other stuff is, this phenomenon is. I mean, you look at it and you take it for what it is. Now sometimes I just take it with a grain of salt. It's there. I don't know what it is. So I'll talk about it, but I don't understand it, and I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot of things I don't understand. I think in the end, everybody has to come down to their own sort of way of looking at this. Most of the people I know that have gone through abduction experiences actually turn into really gracious, loving, understanding, compassionate beings. And so you have to look at that and you go, okay, is that because you went through a traumatic experience and you came out of that this particular way? Not everybody does, but I think most people in abduction experiences do. They come out with a different understanding. It is like the old mystery schools, the initiation ceremonies, right? These old agricultural, archetypes and the myths of, a death, rebirth, and death and rebirth. You come up, you die, you go through a terrible experience, and then through that experience, through that pain, you come out of that pain with an understanding that the world is different than what you normally think it is, and that there is a lot more to it, and that gives you some kind of a spiritual awakening sometimes. And I think if you can do that in your lifetime, then you've done quite a bit. You don't have to do much more, except maybe live. But most people walk around in a daze. They don't think about anything except themselves, the acquisition of money, wealth, things along those lines. They see people as the other. But when you get to a point in your life, and I think these abduction people that went through the abduction experiences should sit back and put a collective pat on their back and say, you've gone through what most people will never go through in a lifetime. You've learned something incredibly important. You've learned Christ consciousness, or you've learned, cosmic consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And that in itself is just a great thing. It's probably the best thing you can do in a lifetime.
Affirmed in spades. That's the hokey pokey. It links well with a set of questions I've so looked forward to asking you. There's a perceived divide between experiencers on this side and black programs, alphabet agencies on the other side. This imagined division between these realms, for me in this mystery, it just feels like everyone is a person. Everyone was born of a woman, came into the realm of form, is navigating samsara. What do you wish experiencers better understood about the CIA? And what do you wish, in turn, the CIA or agencies in general better understood about experiencers?
Yeah. Again, very, very good question. And I don't know if my answer is going to be helpful or not. The CIA, the NSA, DIA, FBI, their primary, reason for existence is the defense of the United States. It has nothing to do with spiritual matters, has nothing to do with UAPs in general, except in the sense that it's a national security issue. If we don't know what it is, and it might be in our airspace, things along those lines. I would guarantee that 99.9% of the people that work in these organizations don't know very much about UAPs and or abduction experiencers, what have you. It's just not on their plate. They deal with there's a national security directive which tells you what your job is, and your job is China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, climate change. I mean, there's all kinds of issues. I'll guarantee you on that national security directive, UAPs and the phenomena doesn't exist on that. It just doesn't. I mean, I've seen these things that, no one collects against this. They collected against it a little bit in the 50s and 60s, but that was more along the lines of, is this a sort of a Soviet attempt to get into, our civic organizations along those lines. But it was never anything serious. And I've spoken with people that actually did that back in the day, and they would tell me the same thing. And we don't have any idea what's going on, because we were told to go out and meet so-and-so and get their story and come back and check it out. So there isn't any kind of a direct knowledge of that. If there is a place in government, for instance, where this is discussed and where that could be, I have my own ideas. I don't want to say where, but if this place does exist, I will tell you that it's small, just by the fact that no one's heard of it. It has to be small, and it's probably got so much on its plate trying to figure this thing out that it wouldn't know what to say. You have to understand about, the government in general. I mean, the government they are exactly like you and me. I grew up in Ohio, in northeastern Ohio. I went to Catholic schools. I was a newspaper boy, worked my way through college. I had a normal 50s, 60s upbringing, you know what I mean? Became, smoked pot when I was 14 and 15, did all kinds of stuff, crazy stuff. But nevertheless, I've always had this liberal sort of mindset, very progressive mindset. And then there are these I work with, they tend to be more conservative or what have you, but they're everyday people. They're just everyday people. They're just like us. And for them, I mean, when we put that burden on them and we say to them, well, gee, you're part of a conspiracy or a cabal, that to me just does not, ring true at all with the people I know and the people I work with. And these include they're all pretty much, people, strong moral and ethical compass. And I think that's true in most agencies. I think what happens is, and this is where secrecy comes in. It's a needed thing, but it has another side to it, and it looks like people are hiding something, and of course they're hiding everything, right? If they're hiding one thing, they're hiding everything, and I think that's what's causing a lot of problems with people's lack of confidence in government. Of course, the government doesn't help either by doing stupid things over and over again. But then again, it's a government organization. It's filled with people, and people do stupid things on occasion. By and large, we have the best civil service in the world in the United States. People get their checks on time, hospitals run, schools are going, pretty things along those lines. And it's been like that for a long, long, long time. So is there an element, that's working with this? Yeah, probably, in my opinion. Should they be able to offer some solace or some kind of reinforcement? I wish they'd be able to. I wish they would. But my own personal feeling is they're just as much in the dark as we are. So in essence, I don't think you're ever going to find any kind of like a get together, or a common understanding or common ground. The closest thing I've seen to that was, this part of this group I'm in of people, a 100-person group that's being studied, and where there is a lot of compassion, but we don't talk to one another. I know a few people in the group just because I know them, and I've known them before their experiences and after. And but by and large, everything is HIPAA restricted. You can't share the data, the medical data, so everybody's sort of bound by that. Just confidentiality, agreements, things along those lines. There's a lot of legitimate reasons why things, don't happen between the government. And again, if you speak, to Jim Lukatsky or Lou Elizondo or, Chris Mellon or Colm Kelleher or some of these guys, George Knapp, who are involved, and Bigelow, who are involved with, I think was probably the most hands-on experience you could possibly have with the phenomenon. I mean, they're pretty open about it. But I've never heard anything come out of their mouths that basically explained what it is at all. As a matter of fact, I think they're just as confused as we all are. Now, they're a lot smarter than me, and so they might have, a better understanding of what it could be, but there's no answer here. I think we're sort of, we're born onto this planet without an instruction book, right? So we end up with religion, and religion tries to explain it. And it's fine. I think, it's a necessary thing for people. And then we delve into ourselves and we become spiritual beings, because I think we are naturally anyway. And then we tap into that. And some of us are lucky enough to tap into that and find that there is something outside of ourselves. And what a wonderful, wondrous experience that is. But putting together things like the phenomenon, UAPs, all the psychic stuff, the 26 different types of, psychic phenomena, near-death experiences, transmigration of souls, reincarnation, consciousness in general, trying to mold that into a unified theory of phenomena. I think they're all connected. I just don't know how. And because we don't understand any of those dots. So how the hell are we going to connect them if we don't understand at all how they work?
Love that. Poetic and powerful.
I just wish I was smarter. Honest to God, I sound like, to myself at least, but I hope I sound like an everyman, because I view myself as an everyman. I mean, I'm not particularly intellectual, and I'm not a UAP researcher by any stretch of the imagination, but I've read a lot. But I like to keep it as simple as I possibly can, and to sort of break this down into elements and make sure that we all understand that we all should be looking at this in a certain way, and the only way we can, and it's a human way, right? And then try to give each other doubt as much as we possibly can, and call things out when they need to be called out. But I think we should give everybody the benefit of the doubt on this. If I knew, I try to explain this to people. I couldn't abide living with the fact that if I knew that there was some kind of nasty conspiracy thing going on and I knew about it, I'd be shouting to the rafters about it, because it's just so wrong. We had discussed MILAPs, earlier on, and, you talk about something that is really, problematic. Boy, I'll tell you, I feel sorry for that. I didn't mean to bring it up. I didn't want to discuss it, but that's another thing, that I don't know what to do with it.
Well, I love that you touched on it because it exemplifies the dynamic well. It's a tiny fraction of humanity that's engaging this puzzle at all, much less trying to implement a modicum of influence to improve conditions for humans and our sovereignty. Almost no one is focused there. So I've appreciated the part of our conversation that considers not only is there not some big cabal, there's no one in charge. Each of us is just contending with the anomalies according to our own tools and development. That's the good news, bad news. If you're an experiencer and you're in a long-term relationship with non-human entities, you probably already have more information than most folks. Let me ask you about the non-homogeneity within or among agencies. In the last few weeks, we seem to be receiving another little flood of people speaking out, making strong statements. These things ebb and flow, but the last few months have been dynamic. The Navy, the CIA, Chris Mellon's quite strongly worded article that raked the Air Force over the coals, and really ballsy. What are your thoughts on the variation among these organizations as it pertains to these phenomena? We see a different behavior from the Navy or CIA than we do from the Air Force, for instance. Why is it so different from one to the next? It's each organization, for instance. If you take the topic like counterterrorism, each organization has their own way of dealing with counterterrorism issues that's pertinent to their particular organization. So the Air Force is concerned with counterterrorism, the Air Force faces things along those lines. So they're going to have their own counterterrorism program that's focused on Air Force objectives and defensive mechanisms, things along those lines. And every organization has that. So they all operate under this one rubric of counterterrorism, but they all operate separately. When you looked at the Navy, the Navy basically started, OSAP and ATIP because these things were showing up, these Tic Tacs, and were showing up over their carrier strike force groups, and they didn't know what to make of it. And finally, one brave operations guy just said to the captain of the, do you really want to send up a training program with all these things up in the air? And of course, that's when Dave Fravor took off, and one thing led to another. But was the Navy program, the OSAP and ATIP program, was that the only program dealing with UAPs? No. UAPs have been showing up. And if you read, I always recommend Robert Hastings' book, UFOs and Nukes. It is just such a wonderfully put together book. It's a seminal book on this phenomenon. And he does it and with such erudition. So, so who runs all the nuclear sites? Well, the Air Force has that, under their wing. And then you have the different air bases and the different naval air bases deal with technology development and what have you. Each of them has a specific way of dealing with some of this stuff. There is no central clearinghouse. I have not seen one. There are a couple organizations now that are, believe it or not, vying to get that.
Beforehand, it was like the hot potato in government, right? Nobody wanted it. Nobody would admit they were doing anything. So things were very stovepipe. And to a large extent, they still are. I think that's going to change a little bit. But that's just how government works. I mean, there are conversations and dialogues that go on between each government agency, at certain levels, but it's not that, they're not that close in general. They share intelligence and they share information, but they do it I think on a limited basis. And it's need to know. CIA and NSA doesn't need to know what the Air Force is doing regarding X, Y, and Z. It's just out of their purview. They have no need to know that. So that's how sort of that works. So are there other organizations that are working on this topic? In my absolutely. Will they be talking to one another about that? Well, I don't know. I would hope that they are, but I don't know. But when you have these task force come out, task force, and this is wonderful. I think this is a giant step forward. And I think you're going to get one or two different task forces. You're going to get one that's solely for the military that's going to deal mostly in classified national security stuff, which is fine. We're not going to get anything out of that or very little out of that. But I think if the Gillibrand Amendment does one where the DNI runs it and there's a public side to it, and I think there has to be a public side to it, a private side where they come out and they publicly say, this is what we found, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's going to happen too. The big thing is going to be, when the budget gets passed, and it hasn't been passed yet, how much money are they going to get? Who's going to run it? If you put somebody in there, if you know anything about the government works on a general service, scale. It's 1 to 15. For this comparative purposes, like a GS-14 would be, these are seniors, 13 is considered, 12 and 13 are considered journeymen. But, 14 is like a major, a 15 is like a lieutenant colonel, and then a 15 with the highest grade, a step, they call them steps, it's like 10 steps in between grades. That would be equivalent of a full colonel. So if you put somebody like a GS-15 in charge of these things, they're not going to get too far with other organizations. Other organizations generally respond to power. So if you have somebody like an SES, a senior executive service, or in the intelligence community, they call it an SIS, senior intelligence service, a 1, 2, or 3, they go up to 5. If you have somebody like a 2 or 3 level, they're going to have a lot more power. And particularly if they report directly to like the DNI or the Secretary of Defense, they're going to have a lot more power into getting other organizations share their data. So we need to wait and see how this is all going to work out. We're hoping that the task force themselves are made up of, ladies and gentlemen who have some kind of knowledge of the phenomenon. And there aren't that many out there, believe me, as you know. So we're sort of hoping, you can get top flight scientists, but you really need people to know a lot more about this because it's a steep learning curve. So I guess, I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic that we're going to see things. I think what you're going to be definitely seeing more of is public, you're going to see more of these memos coming out from the task force basically saying, well, it's like the last one they put out, we had 144 sightings, we could only explain 4. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And hopefully you'll even see more videos because some of the videos that I've seen are rather compelling. Once you've been briefed on it, and I've been briefed on it, and classified briefings on it. And the classified briefings are basically up front and close, and including all the data and the hard data and stuff. When you look at that, there's no way you walk away from it saying it's ours or it's Chinese or it's Russian. Anybody who has worked in the intelligence sector and military sector for any period of time, and particularly on the analytical operational side, knows pretty much, generally speaking, what the Russians are capable of, what the Chinese and the French and the Brits and the Israelis are capable of. And trust me, this is nowhere near that. This is way beyond. This is just orders of magnitude beyond. So I think we may be seeing something. I don't think they're going to give away the complete store on this, because some of it is they have data associated with it that is classified, and they don't want to, like I said, tell your friend, tell your enemy. So they don't want to necessarily do that. They might clean it up a little bit, but it will be enough, I think, to cement in people's minds that there is an element that is living with us, that we don't know anything about, and that is part of our reality, and it is probably natural. That's the other thing I like to remind people of. If it occurs, it's natural. So if it's natural, I mean, I have it's probably a big N, natural, but nevertheless, that's something we can, I think, look at and say, you take a deep breath and go, okay, it's natural, right? And we'll go from there.
This is the elephant in the room, right? For a long time on Aliens and Artists, we've been talking about UFOs as smoke and entities as fire. Your recent declaration that these things are otherworldly and everyone in the government knows it, this seems to be such a interesting finesse point. On one hand, the government is built for practical concerns, North Korea, China, climate change. It's not built for high strangeness or transrational anomalies. So I wonder if an expanded version of your statement might be, these things are otherworldly and everyone in a position to know with access to sufficient information knows it. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, you said it better than I did. I mean, like I said, I have a tendency to get excited, particularly when George talks to me, and he's just a dynamic interviewer, and he gets me to say things that I normally wouldn't say. So, yeah, I mean, by that, what I meant to say was anybody who's seen the evidence, or anybody with any type of knowledge of international aerospace developments and what is out there, what is in Jane's Defense Weekly, you know what I mean? And then plus all the classified data, they know that this is otherworldly. And what I mean by otherworldly is exactly what you said. Interdimensional, take your pick. I don't think anybody knows for sure. I mean, when you look at this, I mean, when the New York Times article came out in 2017, it was a very good article and very well written. But, they sort of missed the point, I thought. I mean, the point wasn't that there was a UFO program in the government. The point was that they just broke the story of the millennia, and they didn't discuss what these things could possibly be. Now, they were being cautious, and that was deliberately so, and I understand that. But when you look at this, I mean, when you see the Gillibrand Amendment, right, and take a look at the Gillibrand Amendment, and it says we're going to be looking at this, the nuts and bolts side, these craft are showing up, they're transmedium, things along this line, no apparent propulsion, Lou Alessandro's 5 observables. But Lou also, added a 6th observable, or 7th observable, and it was basically biological effects and psychic effects, or psychological effects, you can also say. And to me, that's the issue. I mean, the issue isn't the craft. I mean, the craft are the craft. The craft, we think they're physical and they're non-physical at the same time. In other words, they show up, they show up on our radar, and then they just disappear completely. And they just become non-matter, right? That quickly, in the blink of an eye. So you look at that and you go, okay. That's where, Jacques always said, are they flying or are they objects? Well, we don't even know if they're flying or they're objects. They could be objects and something totally subjective, or something immaterial that, is holographic in nature. Don't know, that actually is able to show, radar returns. But the big issue for me is always going to be, it's not a question of what are those things. It's like, it's like, what's behind that? And what is it doing to us? And, Jacques spent many books discussing this, and I agree with him 100% on it. And other people have written about this too, the psychological and sociological effects, the cultural effects of this phenomenon, on our psyche and in the way we live and the way we conduct ourselves. So these are very, very important. I mean, every one of those pilots had more than just a sighting, and they had an experience with a capital E. And that includes psychological, effects, some biological effects. Some people, look at your experiences themselves. I mean, you know what I mean? And I include myself. I mean, had absolute physical things occur to you. In mine, it was pretty apparent what I wish I would have taken a picture of it, but I didn't. But it's, markings, whatever it particularly is, burn marks, something along those lines. So you have to ask yourself, what is all this about? So I think what the Gillibrand Amendment is trying to get at is the complete picture. And this is what makes me feel optimistic that they're not just looking at, what are these aircraft, and are they Chinese, or are they Russian? That's the silliest damn thing I've ever heard. Of course, they're not Chinese and Russian. Or Russian. They've been showing up for 70 years. 70 years ago, the Soviet Union was barely dealing with a jet engine at the time, let alone, these transmedium vehicles. So in the end, I think, we have a good way forward. It depends on a lot of things, as everything in government does. The cat is out of the bag. I've said that before publicly on television and everything too, that once these congressmen and senators got briefed on this, and more are getting briefed, all they have to do is ask. And they start seeing the classified data on this, and which is just data that's more compelling than the 3 videos you saw that came out with the New York Times, and some other things too. And they start hearing some of the stuff that happened to Skinwalker, to some of the people that were there. And to get about 80% of it, you can read, the latest Skinwalker book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And I recommend that to anybody who wants to read it. It's a wonderful book, sort of sums it up. And boy, I'll tell you, there are a lot of questions that remain unanswered.
I concord. And so important, for instance, in being able to tell experiencers publicly from positions of power and authority that they are not crazy. This stuff has been happening since before we were born. It's real, and everyone in the know recognizes that. And in parallel, the world isn't developmentally there yet. It can't metabolize it. But both facets are true and operating in tandem. I wonder what you'd say to experiencers in this respect. What words of support or encouragement for those experiencers wrestling with this reality or these realities, trying to heal and become healthy in what is often a sick culture. What would you say to those listeners?
That's an excellent question. As somebody, my wife and I are both experiencers, and when I look at this, and I don't want to classify experiencers as special, because, anytime, and John Mack did a lot of work on this, and, they're not special people. They have matter of fact, they're healthier psychologically than the general population. So we know there's nothing wrong with us mentally, right? But yet we were presented, for some unknown reason, with a challenge, with an experience that is being left up to us, and sometimes with the help of a good therapist and friends or what have you, to make sense of. And what you're left with is, after the experience, a lot of people are left with a calming feeling, a feeling that it's changed their lives and what have you. They basically come to terms with it. It was it was something that they had to work out themselves. Why it's happened to us, we don't really know, and I don't think we're going to know for any time in the future. All I will say is if it's bothering you on a daily basis, then you really have to probably seek some kind of help, therapeutic help. My wife's a psychologist, so it's because it's no different than anything else that happens to you. It's a traumatic event, and you have to deal with the traumatic event, and you have to process the trauma. And processing the trauma, if you view it as trauma, it can last. It can last anywhere from a year to 10 or 20 years. Everybody's different. But you just have to learn, how to live with it. You never forget it. The goal isn't necessarily forgetting it. The goal is basically adjusting to it and adapting to it, realizing A, it's not going to kill you, and B, it's something or someone is sending you a message. And if they're sending it to you, and you're not sending it to 99% of the people in the world, but they're sending it to you, then you have to say to yourself, what does that actually mean? And it might mean that, you're at the forefront of something completely different. Maybe an evolution, maybe you're just evolving in a certain way before everybody else has, and you're able to pick this stuff up. It's no different than people who are psychic or people that are empaths, who basically can pick up thoughts from other people, and they live with that. Some people see the dead. It's shocking. It's frightening, but you have to put it in its proper place. It doesn't control you. It can't control you. It can't drive you insane unless you allow it to. So you just basically, put it in its place. And then if you have to talk to it, and I do that sometimes, when I get, fearful and stuff, I just say, hey, back off, just back off. And for me, it works. It works. But let me get back to, what you said in the question earlier about, people thinking that they're, hallucinating, or they're getting into these states, or, they're having a psychic break and all this. That's nonsense. It's just absolute nonsense. I'm sure there's one or two people that are generally, mentally have a mental illness, that, are seeing things like that. But for the most part, I mean, the vast majority of these people are not having hallucinations or what have you, or any kind of psychic events. They just had an event. The problem, here, and I think, Mac brought this out, and other people, particularly during the conference at MIT in 1992. And I remember one of them, and I can't remember the gentleman who said this. He said, but the issue here is if you basically take all the experiencers, and you basically say that they're all suffering from hallucinations or psychic disequilibrium, or, some kind of neuropathology or what have you, you then have to basically reframe it and ask the question, why are all these people, hundreds of thousands of people, having the same damn dream, having the same hallucination, having the same psychic disequilibrium event? How do you answer that? Where does that fit into the medical model? It doesn't. It doesn't fit in, which basically says to me, it confirms for me that this is real. These are real events that are happening to real people, and it has nothing to do with their mental health at all. It has everything to do, I think, with spiritual growth of some kind, or something from the universe has reached out and tapped them. It's like a mystic or a saint experiencing God. They go into these. Whether they're, shamans, they chant and, or they sing or they dance, whatever, they work themselves, and then they see the divine, right? They see the other side, and they usually get glimpses that last, anywhere from 2 or 3 seconds, to maybe a minute or two, or maybe a half an hour, and then they come back and then totally changed completely. So, it's a way bodies and our minds are evolving, our consciousness is evolving into a different consciousness. Are these the harbingers? Are these the new leaders that are taking us into something new and something different down the road? I tend to think that's what's going on, to be honest with you. And so in a sense, they're voyaging. It's a lot like Star Trek, right? They're going where no man has ever gone before, or no woman has ever gone before. And they're our leaders. And you have to look at yourself like that, because there's no other way to look at it. I don't see any other way to look at it. I don't see it. I see it as, again, as, it's hard to express. I mean, a negative way, in the sense it's a human rights violation. But we're looking at it, if we look at that, and I always have to remind myself, you're looking at it again through a human lens. I mean, is this something else? I mean, completely. And that this is part of the initiation you're going to go through. I don't know. All I know is the people I've met, the experiencers I've known, to me are just wonderful, wonderful human beings. And, even though some of them are still bothered by the event, it has changed them. And it's changed them, I think, in a very positive way, at least most of them. And I know that's really not satisfying to a lot of experiencers out there, but that's the best I can do, I guess.
That's tremendously affirming, and I share that view. I'm 50. It's been about 30 years. I've known hundreds of experiencers. The percentage of them that could attribute their anomalous history to some psychological malady is less than controlled for in the general population, I would say.
Less. It's actually less.
Yep. Conversely, as you highlighted beautifully, what I find is that experiencers are the most high-functioning in some senses. The ingenuity with which they live their lives is astounding. They've learned to navigate two realities simultaneously. They hold down a job in consensus reality, working at the post office, paying bills, raising a family, while also attending to this whole other order of existence, integrating it all into one life, and it's astonishing.
It is. Wait do you speak with John Ramirez, and my CIA buddy, just an incredible human being, and he'll go back and he's had experiences since he was a child, and I won't get into it here, but just an incredible human being, and he's been living with this his whole life, and what a wonderful man, and he could explain this way better than I can. He's much smarter than I am. You'll get that when you talk to him. So.
A big picture question I'm curious to hear from you on is how optimistic or pessimistic you feel when you sense your way forward to the next few centuries on planet Earth. Not to be apocalyptic, but climate change, insect collapse, ocean acidification, infertility crisis, but also the positives, the supernova of consciousness expansion in the last century in many realms. How do the coming centuries feel and look to your intuition?
I've always been an optimist, and the human condition. We discussed it earlier. About throwing the novel, the new, out, and having people try to accept that. Most people, by and large, if you took the population in general and you basically parsed them out and said, well, okay, who are the innovators, the leader types? You can have a small group of these people that really enjoy change and like pushing things forward, and probably 6, 7, 10% of the population is sort of like that. They like change. They like things that are basically mutable, that you can discuss new things and push new things, new ideas. And then you look into the other end, you can have these other people and who basically say, no, I like things the way they are, and I'm very comfortable with that. And I change is very difficult for me, and I don't like being pushed a lot. I like it more gradual. And then you got most of the people. Most of us are sort of in the middle. I'm sort of tend towards the right a little bit, but most in the middle, who can live with change, but incremental change and see things move forward, understand that things are moving forward and stuff like that. So that's who we are, as a human species in one level. And so you look at that and you go, okay, so when you see all these problems that are going on in the world today, our current political mess with the Democrats and Republicans, the progressives and the alt-right and things along those lines, you sort of see that, working itself out one way or the other. And it usually has to do with change and how much change is going through. So of course, what's happening, right? Well, the world is in a constant state of change. It's always in a state of change. And it's very difficult for most people, to catch up with it. People are basically the same. If you took Aristotle, and you moved him into a, 21st century philosophy class at the University of Michigan and sat him down there, he could understand Kierkegaard, and he'll be able to talk to you about, philosophers and what have you. And there'd be a wonderful discussion, and some of his philosophy would still be relevant, to what we're discussing now. But technologically, no, it's a whole different mindset. Our technology is moving so fast that people just can't get a grip on it. I hold it, my iPhone in my hand, and I don't know how it works. Everything that went into this, it's overwhelming me. And then there's more to come, and with medicine and things along those lines. And then you dump the phenomenon on top of that. We're a bunch of, I think Gary Nolan said, we're a bunch of angry monkeys, and in a way we are in some states. We're just a bunch of monkeys flinging stuff at one another sometimes, and that sometimes we can also be contemplative, maybe like the gorillas or something, or the orangutans. We have some of that in them. But we do have consciousness, and we do know, we do have moral fiber and ethical fiber and stuff like that. So I generally tend to be optimistic, but I also tend to be realistic and pragmatic about it too. So yeah, I think we're going to save ourselves. I think the climate crisis is not good, and I think we're going to suffer through that until we come up with some kind of a solution. But as far as the evolution in consciousness goes, I think I think this is the beginning of it. I mean, quantum mechanics came into being right around the 1920s, maybe early 20s. And it basically what it said was, the world isn't what it seems. We have superpositioning, we have quantum entanglement, we have all kinds of stuff. The double slit experiment and things like that, which basically says reality is when it's observed, which means that there's 1,000 different realities that could take place at any given time. Well, try to wrap your head around that. I can't wrap my head around that. Philosophers can't wrap their head around that. It changes our whole optic. But we're getting more and more into quantum mechanics, and more experiments are being done, which point to our reality being more quantum than Newtonian. So this orderly universe that we live in is good at the macro level, but at the micro level, it doesn't work. Or the atomic level or subatomic level, it just doesn't work at all. So there's a battle now, which one's right, or how do you basically merge the two into some grand unified theory? I think we're going to get closer to that. I think we're going to get closer to what consciousness is. I'm hoping that somebody will develop a private think tank that is well funded, that deals with these issues, the phenomenon in general, abduction experiences, contact experiences, UAPs in general, and that it's well funded, much like SETI is well funded, and that we can devote a lot of time and energy to that and to trying to figure what this actually is, so we can have a better understanding of ourselves. So I'm optimistic. I think things are going to turn out well. I think we're going to have a better understanding of death and life after death. I believe in life after death. I can't prove it, but I have a unwaverable belief in it. So I'm a big fan of the works of Michael Newton. I don't know if you know him, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls.
We've certainly been through rougher patches. 42,000 years ago, the entire species nearly went extinct. Magnetic field reversal, that was a bottleneck. I'd love to hear any cautionary reflections you might have on projecting either our lower or higher selves onto non-human entities. Sometimes when we encounter beings that can pass through walls, communicate telepathically, manipulate time, screen, or shape our memory, or when we witness their exotic technology, we can imagine that these things equal higher or deeper development, which is a big assumption, that these things indicate deeper moral, ethical, or social development. How do you feel about the romantic human inclination to conflate exotic technology or capacities with interior development?
That's an excellent question. Another one. I think the romanticism, the romanticizing that, and the sentimentalizing this whole idea of outer space beings coming down, benevolent brothers, I think is very dangerous, because what you're dealing with is something that's unknown, and and you tread cautiously. You should tread cautiously. That doesn't mean you treat it as an quote unquote other and you shoot it. It just means that you treat it with respect. But everybody knows now that there's a trickster element involved in all of this. It lies to people, constantly. It only seems to have two messages. One, you're screwing up the environment, and two, you're a messy, race that basically starts wars and kills people. So it has this one message that's sort of coming out all the time, and it says the same thing over and over and over again. Then there's this whole genetic thing, and what have you. But it is, and I was speaking to a physicist friend of mine and saying, well, what if it is only, what if they are entities that could only do one thing well? And that one thing well is manipulate time, space, and show us things that aren't really there. In other words, they come in and they look like grays, but they really don't look like grays at all. They look like insectoids, right? Or what if they are able to basically put things in your mind and have you believe what you want to believe? So that that has to be taken seriously, because if that's the case, we can't really trust any of our experiences with the phenomenon, can we? Because we don't really know whether those remembrances that we have, or the memories that we have, or the experiences that we have are actually, real. If you're laying in your bed and you got physically taken out of your bed and someone saw you flying out a window and going up into a spacecraft, that's one thing. If independent observers saw that, maybe, unless they too. But, there's been numerous instances where people were basically taken, from their bed or from someplace where they physically remained exactly where they are, but yet they'll tell you they were in the spaceship and they went through this whole process. But could it be that the people who were watching them were also, basically, had the faith for them too? Or is it all just, a light show, what I mean? Some kind of a display of technology that is able to basically fool, illusionary, I guess what you want to say. So the answer, there's no real definitive answer here. We're really walking into what Whitley Strieber called, and I'm paraphrasing here, a forest of hypotheses. It's hard to come down with anything concrete, to say anything concrete about this, except that it happens. We know it happens. And we know it happens in a certain way to certain people. And, we've outlined what happens for experiencers in general, it's happen, and then there's a conversation, and then there's this, and, and then they take you, then they bring you back, and then they have a conference with you, and then they do all kinds of things. They give you the message, and the message is generally the same. The appearances change, probably 10, 15 different types of, entities that appeared to people. Mine were certainly strange. I'd never heard of them before or seen them before. They've only been 2 or 3 times in the history that I can find these beings showed up. So, I don't know. And this is one of the hard things when you try to have a conversation with a scientist about this, because you're talking to a scientist who's used to, the scientific method and, the predictability, reliability, things along that, testing the hypotheses, the theorizing, things along those lines, and then the backup data that you can say, I had an observation, and then I can now go through this process of, proving it or not proving it, or at least saying that it's going to happen 99.9% of the time. With this, you don't have this. Everything's anecdotal. Everything tends to be more subjective. We have some objective data. Some of it's hard data, but not a lot of it, right? Some of it's anecdotal. And the only way we can study this isn't really through the scientific method per se, it's through field-centric research, the way we study animals in the wild. We watch their environment, and then we, write scientific papers based on our own observations, and put in peer-reviewed journals. That's what Jacques Vallée pushes, and I think he's absolutely right on that. When you try to take this to a physicist and an engineer, and you say solve the EAP problem, solve the UAP problem, they're going to say, well, it doesn't fit into my box, doesn't fit into it. So
it almost seems the intelligence delights in evading measurement, as though it's mirroring for us the limits of our mere empiricism, which has become ossified in the past century. The phenomenon seems to love tossing that in our face.
Yeah, it's exactly what it does. Tricksters, I always think about the fool in Shakespeare. If you read Shakespeare, there's in a few of his plays, in Lear and some of the other plays, there's always a fool bouncing around, and the fool's job is to make fun of the king without getting his head chopped off. And basically what he does with the king is, he tell the king or the queen or some people in court, you're making fools of yourself by doing X, Y, and Z, because I'm telling you the truth, but I'm telling you the truth in a way that I'm making fun of you and all this kind of stuff. I apologize for that. But, there's this trickster element there, and you have why that is. But tricksters in general try to disrupt. They tend to be disruptive elements. And what do disruptive elements actually do? They change the way you think about things. So this is a part of that. Now, if you can go back and make correspondences and thematic relationships between, the fairies, the legends of the fairies, and the elementals that we had, in different cultures. throughout, where they would have the trickster element involved too. They would kidnap people, take them to fairyland and what have you. There's lots and lots of correspondences between UAP and the phenomena and, old fairy lore and witches and all this kind of stuff. And are they the same thing? Maybe. They seem to be identical in some respects. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it's the same thing. They're just culturally appearing differently, in the Irish culture, say for the Celtic culture and the British culture, and the current culture now. Although you can make the case that they seem to mimic, the science or the technology or the culture whenever they appear. So, it's a good study for folklorists. I know, Tom Bullard, the folklorist who wrote The Myth and Mystery of UFOs. It's a fascinating book. Patrick Harper wrote Daimonic Reality, which is sort of a look from a Greco, sort of Roman kind of look, all the way through, current UFO, UAP literature on diamonds, demons and what have you. So, we just don't have enough evidence. We like I said, we do have correspondences, relationships, thematic relationships that go throughout, the last 2,000 years of history. But I think we're missing one or two things here that can prove the link between them.
I recall you were visited by a hooded being when a friend of yours had passed away. I'm wondering about the ways in which that visitation, that being was or was not similar to the intelligence in the contact event, the one we began the conversation with. Can you share any reflections on the commonalities or distinctions between the two events?
Yeah, that's interesting. I know I never really thought about it, but now that you mention it, the first one, when it happened, there was no fear involved. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, as I was laying in bed and I saw these three entities at the base of my bed, they had little smiles. Well, I looked to be smiles, on their faces. And even though I couldn't move, I had no fear at all. And I remember looking over to my right because I was worried about my wife, and then I saw her in a fetal position there next to me, which she generally doesn't sleep in. The covers were off, and I was like, this is odd. But and then one thing happened after another. But even at the when I woke up, I shouldn't say I woke up because I don't think I woke up. My eyes just opened. So that's actually what it was. It was like right there, and then it wasn't there, and then my eyes opened up, and boom, 7:00 in the morning. And so there wasn't any fear, and that's one thing, because when I saw this hooded figure, and it was a sort of truncated. It wasn't. It looked like your typical messenger hooded figure. You ever see those dementors in Harry Potter? Well, cut them in half, right, and make them less demented. You know what I mean? And because there wasn't anything evil about this at all. And I got up as 60-year-old would at 2:00 in the morning and go to the bathroom, and went back, sat in my bed, and noticed my wife stole the covers again. So I was sitting in bed with my back against the headboard, trying to straighten the covers without waking her up. And all of a sudden, I looked to my left, and it was a window there, but it was a wall there, and it sort of came through the wall and the window at the same time. And it was just a hooded figure, and it was in the air, probably about 3 or 4 feet in the air, and it was about near the foot of my bed, and it went it was sort of off to an angle to my left. And I'm one of the biggest scaredy cats on the planet. I mean, I got to sleep with lights on, at least little lights on in the room, and I keep my door locked. I mean, I've always been afraid of the dark, which is another interesting thing people like to talk to me about, but why that occurs. But anyway, I had absolutely no fear at all. I'm sitting there looking at this thing, thinking, this is the most amazing thing. And it's just shimmering in front of me, but it was black, right? And the room was dark, but it wasn't dark. It was like, you can see the black against the, sort of dusk-like atmosphere of the room. And it wasn't looking at me, it was looking straight ahead. And then where it was looking towards like the bathroom door. And then all of a sudden it just turns and completely faces me. And there's no face, it's just the hooded figure with a little black under the hood, just a black empty space. And it looks at me, and it's lasted about 4 or 5 seconds only. And I looked at it, and again, I wasn't afraid. And normally I'd be jumping out of my skin, and then it turned, away again. And then it just gradually went out the side wall, of the bedroom and gone. And I remember just sitting there, and again, I go back to Robert Hastings' response, just responses like, well, am I going to wake everybody up? Start shouting to the roofs. This thing came through the wall. I said, no, this is fascinating. I'll tell Debbie in the morning, my wife, Debbie. And I just crawled into bed and went to sleep. I was out like a light. Next morning I got up, and we were waltzing around the house. I think it was a Saturday, and we were getting ready to go to Miami to visit my friend Mark, and who was very, very, very ill in the hospital down there. And then we got a phone call and said, Mark died last night, about 2:30 in the morning. Same time I saw, around approximately the same time I saw this hooded figure. So, my wife and I looked at each other, and we got married. We moved into a house, and we had poltergeists in that house for many, many years. And we lived with that, and we thought it was fine, and it was not an issue with us. And we didn't give it any energy. We knew they were there, footsteps. I mean, I can tell you stories, and it was just incredible. But it was sort of, they were almost became sort of the family, right? So we didn't have to say anything about that. So to us, it was just sort of like, well, okay, just part of this, unnatural thing or natural things that happen and what have you. But I remember calling my contact in the government, part of this program I'm with, because I always say, let us know if you have any more. And I called the guy up, and the name, and you've heard the name. I don't want to say it. He doesn't like being mentioned. But I called him up and I said, what do you think? And he said, you got to contact it. This was a form of contact. He said, go back. He said, get into a meditative state and bring it back and talk to it and try to engage it. And I said, no. I said, I don't want to do that. If it comes back and sees me again, fine. I said, I'm not necessarily tethered to the ground that well. So I said, I'm not inviting something that I don't know anything about into my bedroom or any place else in my house. Unless I'm sure that it's completely and totally, safe and innocuous. I don't mind having a conversation with a, non-corporeal being, but it's got to be on my terms if I can possibly do it. So,
I love this sentiment around the terms of the mutuality. I can so sympathize and empathize. It's a charged question. How much of our inner and outer landscape should be on offer to these entities, these relationships? I love the power of the no in what you're relating. Boundaries that can help preserve our health. The stronger our sovereignty, the more capable we become of engaging with real mutuality. I wish more people had the presence of mind to assert a no, as you did when appropriate.
Yeah, and you should. It's actually just plain old common sense. I mean, you don't invite somebody into your house you don't know, and if you view your body as a temple, and you certainly don't want anything in there that isn't helpful to you in any way, shape, or form. And if you don't know it, don't invite it in. Not all beings, not all entities are helpful. We've seen that, over centuries. I mean, that the old stories about Dracula or hanging out of a window, and the only way he can come in is if you invite him in, and then because there's always somebody who invites him in, right? And because he's so alluring, right? But I know we do know, for instance, that people that are in a meditative state, who meditate quite a bit, are more open to this. People who do chanting or anything that's rhythmic, can go into different realms or what have you. And safe ways to do this, and there are unsafe ways to do this. And if you're not sure of which one, don't do it. And if you are going to do it with somebody who's experienced. And that's whether you're taking psychoactive drugs or whether you're doing something, as simple as meditation. There's simple meditation where, you quiet, your brain, you quiet yourself, focus on your breathing, try to clean out your thoughts and what have you. And then there's very deep, intense transcendental meditation where you really are going someplace a little bit different. So, always helps to be, it always helps to be cautious.
Basic spiritual hygiene.
Absolutely. And, the power of no, absolutely is like, you assert your autonomy, you assert your sovereignty over yourself, and you do it regularly. And, in many, many cases, they respect that, and they will respect that, particularly if they aren't already inhabited, you know what I mean? So, there's only a few cases of daimonic possession that I've heard of that were what I would call total or full possession. And those are really, really rare. And most of the time, if an entity, I don't want to get into that because that's getting into something totally different here.
So quick bibliophile question. What's a book that changed your life?
Like you would imagine, there's a lot of them. I think the big one, though, I always remember was Jacob Burnowski's The Ascent of Man. You're probably too young for that book, but back when I was in college, I read a lot. I was sort of a dilettante, and I still am a dilettante. I'm still a student, but that book really struck me. And I know PBS did a show on Burnowski was a noted historian, and The Ascent of Man was just beautiful. And it's dated now because all the new data that's come in, but that really hit me very, very hard because it talked about how we view ourselves as humans, and how we always like to think that we're right about things, and we see the world in a certain way, and that's the way the world is. And he say things like, no, that's really not the case at all. We have to acknowledge our own ignorance all the time on these topics, which is, segues into this in the sense that, you have to come into this topic with a good degree of open-mindedness, a little bit of skepticism, of course, but open-mindedness probably above all. As Leslie Kane, because you don't know the subject, doesn't give you the right to dismiss it. And I thought that was actually a pretty good quote from her.
Cosmic hugs, my brother.
It was my pleasure, and to your experiences out there, stay the course. Love one another, be together, and reinforce one another. We're all in it together. We're all fellow travelers. Things will happen for the better. You watch, you wait. And anytime, Stu, in the future, I'm always available for you.
And give Deb a hug, too.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Be sure to catch part 3 of our conversation with Jim Semivan. To hear this entire conversation, become a patron or a pluser by clicking the link in the show notes below. Can we talk about Star Axis? Holy fucking shit, you guys. I'm embarrassed to admit I wasn't aware of it until now, and now that I am aware of it, I want to live in it. I want to go to there. I'm going to just read from the website for Star Axis, which I will also link to in the show notes. This is from staraxis.org. Star Axis is an architectonic Earth-star sculpture constructed with the geometry of the stars. Created by artist Charles Ross, all of Star Axis's shapes and angles are determined by Earth to star alignments. They are built into the sculpture so that we can experience them in human scale. Star Axis offers an intimate experience of how the Earth's environment extends into the space of the stars. The approach to building Star Axis involves gathering a variety of star alignments occurring in different timescales and allowing them to form the architecture. The sculpture's name refers to its primary Earth-to-star alignment. It is precisely aligned with Earth's axis, which now points toward our North Star, Polaris. Charles Ross's artwork is about light, time, and planetary motion. Star Axis is his largest project. It was conceived in 1971, and after a 4-year search throughout the Southwest, Ross broke ground in 1976. Star Axis is presently being constructed on a mesa in New Mexico. Built with granite and sandstone, at its outside dimensions, Star Axis will be 11 stories high and 1/10 of a mile across. Star Axis has 5 main elements. The star tunnel is precisely aligned with the Earth's axis. Here the viewer can walk through layers of celestial time, making directly visible the 26,000-year cycle of precession, Earth's shifting alignment with the stars. The solar pyramid marks the daily and seasonal movements of the sun across the shadow field. From inside the hour chamber, you can view 1 hour of Earth's rotation, and from inside the equatorial chamber, you can observe the stars that travel directly above the equator. So let's pause there. This is an 11-story high, 1/10 of a mile wide work of art which allows visitors to step inside its massive architecture and track a 26,000-year precession, as well as seasonal movements, Earth's rotation, and equatorial alignment with galaxies and stars. And it looks as fucking cool as it sounds. You will click the link in the show notes because you have to see this thing. This is some restore your faith in humanity shit right here. Now let's take a listen to each chamber of Star Access, one by one, an auditory tour. Here again I will read directly from the site. The star tunnel is the core of Star Axis. It is exactly parallel to the Earth's axis and points to our North Star Polaris. As you climb the 10-story stairway toward the aperture at the top, you see larger and larger views of the sky. Each view frames an orbit of Polaris for a particular time in the 26,000-year cycle of precession. The stairs in the star tunnel are dated to identify the years. The smallest orbit of Polaris, viewed from the bottom stair in 21 AD, is about the size of a dime held at an arm's length. The largest orbit of Polaris you can see at the top of the star tunnel. It occurs in 11,000 BC and 15,000 AD and encompasses your entire field of vision. From the equatorial chamber, you can observe the sun's path at equinox and the stars that travel directly above the Earth's equator. The equatorial chamber is located in the entrance to the star tunnel, the core of Star Axis that is precisely aligned with the Earth's axis and frames our North Star, Polaris. The equatorial chamber alignments and those of the star tunnel converge at a perfect right angle. The upper room is at the top of the star tunnel. Here, the rim of the aperture encompasses your entire field of vision and frames the circumpolar orbit of Polaris 13,000 years from now. The solar pyramid is a 55-foot-high granite tetrahedron whose form is defined by the summer and winter solstices. From inside the hour chamber, you can view 1 hour of the Earth's rotation. The North Star Polaris is framed in the apex of the 15-degree triangular opening. It takes exactly 1 hour for a star anywhere along the left edge, which is west, to travel to the right edge, which is east. And finally, the shadow field captures the shape traced by all of the solar pyramid's daily shadows over the course of a year. Okay, so go to staraxis.org or click the link in the show notes to learn more or donate. It's set to open in 2025, but I mean, it looks pretty done to me. They're not receiving visitors at this time, but when they open, this is definitely where you want to have prom if you are a hybrid couple. This is certainly where you park your Cybertruck. This is decidedly where you channel light languages. This is absolutely where I misplaced my fifth element. This is unquestionably the portal to Xanadu. This is posalutely the third eyes wide shut sex club. This is assuredly the spot for brunch with your mom if your mom is the necromancer in Raised by Wolves on HBO's Max. HBO Max, you know, the platform that charges you for a premium subscription and still puts fucking ads in your shows. You're paying them to watch their ads. It's sick.
That's true.
Aliens and Artists is brought to you by the Liminal Muse, offering one-on-one work with me, Stuart Davis. Sessions include transpersonal hypnotherapy, contemplative practices, and creativity as a spiritual path. Click the link in the show notes to book a session. Also, the Experiencer Group, a private membership site for experiencers of anomalous phenomena, including near-death, lucid dreaming, psi, mediumship, contact with non-human entities, and much more. Click the link in the show notes to become a member. And of course, above and beyond all, patrons and plussers. Yes, you save me. If If you like the show, become a patron or a pluser by clicking the link at the show notes. You get tons of exclusive content, entire episodes just for you, years worth of TV, film, comedy, music that's on my Patreon. It is a mountain of material. A lot of new projects coming up this year, which will always be rolled out first for patrons and often for them alone.
Zinc into a miniature can, put carbon rods up in the back of a man. He's licking his prongs, it's shocking his tongue. He wanted a charge, it's making him numb. He don't know AC from fucking DC. You get a body, but it isn't for keeps. And every night you gotta die in your sleep. You'll be excarnated and still unaware. The seat of your soul is playing musical chairs. You don't get AC from flux and DC. Don't give me AC and say it's DC. Which one will clutch me? Which will release me? Whatever AC, whatever DC, don't let it touch me, it won't release me. They keep sweeping the starlight under the rugs. They keep doping the kids with these invisible drugs. They keep bumping the mud into the sockets and plugs. There's a dictator born each time a teenager shrugs. From flux and DC. Don't give me AC and say it's DC. Which one will clutch me? Which will release me? Whatever AC, whatever DC, don't let it touch me, it won't release me. What is the sound of one hand slapping your face before your parents were born? You don't get AC, DC.